Hey again, everyone. It's Emma here at Function Point, and I've got Mark along with me who's going to be doing our presentation today all about handling rates in your system. Hopefully everyone can see the screen I'm sharing. It's just our little get rate on it dashboard page there. And I'm just going to take us through a really quick agenda and then going to hand things over to Mark. So I am recording the session today as well, so if anyone needs to drop off before we finish up, or if anyone thinks to themselves that this would have been a good session for another colleague to attend who wasn't available, we are recording and we'll post that probably later today or tomorrow. So let me just take us through one screen here, just going over what we're going to be covering today, or what Mark's going to be covering today. So we're going to be getting an overview of the 3 ways in which you can set up your rates in your system. We're going to learn about the benefits of creating and using cost rates in your system and review some of the common what we call gotchas that can happen behind the scenes when setting up rates, things that our support team hears a lot about. Mark, have I got you there?
Yes, you do. Can you hear me okay?
I can now, yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and make you our presenter here in just a moment, and then you can take it from there. Now, was there anything that I missed in the agenda that you're planning to cover?
No, it sounds good.
Excellent. Well, there you go. The control is yours, my friend.
Okay, let's see. And you're able to see my screen with my demo version up and my cursor kind of moving around a little
I
bit.
I am, and something I forgot to mention. Sorry, I'm stealing your thunder already. I am going to be here answering questions for you. So, for anyone who has questions as Mark goes along, Mark, I'm sure you're going to be checking in with me regularly as you do to see if we've gotten questions, and I'll either answer them as we go or we'll pose them to you when you check in with us.
Sounds good. Thanks, Emma. Thanks, everyone, for joining into our webinar today. With regards to a bit of an agenda, I've really gone back and forth a lot on how I should, the order in which I should be reviewing things today, and I think I've come up with a good method for, the way I'd like to show things. Good method for the madness. Uh, With regards to questions, as always, please do feel free to ask any questions you may have while we go through the webinar. And any that we can address during our call today, we will. But with rates, I have a hunch that we're probably not going to be able to answer as many questions on the fly as we often are, because with rates, it oftentimes requires a more in-depth conversation about what is the problem you're trying to solve and how do the different rates areas in the system relate to that. So we may not be able to answer every question that you have. Furthermore, we do have a hard stop at 12:45 today, well, 12:45 Pacific time, so 45 minutes for the webinar. We're really trying to keep all the webinars to 45 minutes because we find that after that it's kind of hard to stay on for something that goes over 45 minutes to an hour. I'm notorious for going over time, but I'm going to try not to today. So we're going to try to keep that to 45 minutes. So without further ado, I'm going to jump in. Actually, I do want to talk about just a couple things. I'm going to be showing a lot of point-and-click stuff today. Where do you go in the system to manage the rates, create the categories, things like that. And I'm going to touch on scenarios as I go through them and kind of, really stress the importance of having information filled in, even if you don't think that it applies to you. And we're probably going to be sending this webinar to people because I have a hunch that we have a lot of clients that aren't on the call today that may not think that rates applies to them as much as they do. But I mean, who knows? But anyway, so let's jump in. So the first thing that I'm going to be touching on is the creation of rate categories. Right now we're looking at a demo version of my system. I actually just remembered another really important thing that I need to mention, and that is that we are in the process of releasing some upgrades to the system that are really focused around the admin area. And Em and I just realized this earlier today that some of the attendees on the webinar, you may not have received those upgrades in the admin section. The upgrades are mostly visual. There's a little bit of functionality just around how you interact with the page, but the overall functionality of what we'll be reviewing today is going to be exactly the same in your system. And furthermore, if you see visual upgrades that isn't currently deployed on your program, these are things that have been deployed internally for testing on our side very recently, like a couple days ago, and they are things that are going to be going onto your systems very, very soon. I think we're doing another release next week to a segment of clients, so you're going to see this very, very soon. It might be slightly visually different than what you're seeing. But let's jump in. So the first thing I want to talk about is the creation of rate categories. And there's really, kind of three layers of rates in the system, and I'm going to be going through those layers and talking about how they relate to tracking rates and how you bill. So the first thing we're going to be doing is going into the admin section here, and I have an area called Rate and Staff Management, and I have an area called Rate Categories. This is where we're able to create and configure the overall categories that we have in the system. And I happen to have three. I have a rate that's called Client Standard Rate, I have a higher rate, and I have a discount rate.
Hey,
This is
Mark,
yeah,
sorry, it's Emma. Sorry to interrupt. I'm experiencing a bit of lag. I'm not sure if our attendees are seeing it as well. We're about probably 5 seconds behind you at the moment, so I'm not sure if maybe it's an internet issue on our end or maybe it's just me. But yeah, we're having a little bit of lag, so might have to slow your chat for us to keep up with you there.
okay, that's unfortunate. You know what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop showing my screen
Okay.
and come back on,
Yeah, that
and
sometimes does the
hopefully,
trick, doesn't it?
sometimes. Let's take a look. I'm going to stop showing my screen. No one should be able to see anything right now, and then we'll start showing it again, and then you can let me know. I'm going
Okay.
to hover my cursor over admin. I'm going to go into rate categories and re-click on it, and then I'm going to put my cursor just in the middle of the screen and let me know when it's there.
Okay. I'm still not seeing you sharing your screen with us yet. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so Maura's saying she's got the lag issue as well. I really hope that that's going to clear itself up. We're seeing now your manage rate categories screen and your cursor is in the middle.
Okay.
Let's keep moving forward. And I mean, I think the information's still going to be good. So everyone just will hope that the lag issue clears itself up. And if there's anything I can address, just type me a question. But keep going, Mark. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, that's if the lag is that substantial, that's going to be a really big hindrance to this webinar. Um, One thing that I've seen from time to time is we can have a lag internally in our office that may not be coming through to attendees that aren't in the same office. So I'm curious. I'm gonna keep going here. If one of our kind attendees could possibly type in the question box in the GoToWebinar software there in sometime in the next 30 seconds to a minute, and just let Emma know if the lag, if it's either fine for you or if you're experiencing quite a big of a lag. I'm curious as to if that's the case. But I'm gonna keep going, and hopefully it's not too bad. But yeah, so we're looking at the manage rate categories page here, and I have three categories. I have my standard rate, my higher rate, my discount rate, and this is a really common structure. The next thing we're going to take a look at is the application of rates to the actual services. And I'm going to touch more on what these mean and why we need them in just a bit, but I'd like to jump into the next area, which is going to be service rates and markups. So in the admin section, under rate categories, we have service rates and markups. And this is where we're going to see our rate categories that we've created, and then all of our services with the ability to then apply rates to them. Now, a few important things to mention here. The only way that this might not be applicable to you is if you never, ever intend on ever having any kind of time data in the system. And I mean no estimated hours and not a single timesheet ever entered into this program. That is probably pretty rare. I would assume that most of our clients plan on tracking at least a little bit of time. And even if you're not tracking actual hours, maybe having some sort of value as far as estimated hours. If you never plan on having anything related to an hour in the system ever, then sure, this may not be applicable for you. But for everyone else, which I would assume is 99.99% of our clients, it is crucial to make sure that every single service that you have in the system, for at least if you only have just the one rate category, has a value filled in, even if it is a non-billable service and the value is zero. That's really important. I want to do a lag check. Emma, how are we doing?
We are doing great, Mark. Thank you for asking, and thanks to everyone who's chimed in to tell me that it looks to have cleared up. So maybe the lag just needed to have a little moment in the spotlight, and now it's now it's resolved itself. So we are good. Thank you.
Okay, no problem, no problem. So again, I can't stress enough the importance of making sure that every single service here has a rate. And if you add a new service, you need to come into this page and you need to add a rate for that. Now, one thing that I hear a lot is, well, we charge everything based on a fixed fee, so our hourly rates are not really relate to our billing. And I mean that's fine, but if you do track time in the system, having rates of the services is going to allow you to see how the fixed fee compares to the value of the work that you actually did. I want to jump back to the rate category for just a second here. If I go back into my rate categories, you're going to notice that if I create a new rate category, it's going to ask for some default rates. And we put this in because we had clients who were creating rate categories and not having a rate in for each of those services. So it's going to ask you for a default service rate. Now, if you have different rates for different services, then you can apply those on the page that we were just on and we'll be going back to. But it's important to set a default rate, and in fact, the system will not allow you to move forward unless you do so, just to ensure that you have a rate for every single service for each of the categories that you put in. Now, with regards to the service rates here, these are the default rates when no staff person is selected. So let's think about a scenario. If you're a company that's, if you are charging based on time, so if you're going to be billing your work based on the time that's been done, and every single staff person has the same rates, you do not have rates that differ based on staff people, then this is the beginning and the end of the depth of the rate structure in the system for you. You're putting in a rate for each service so that every time, every hour that's tracked by every staff person is multiplied by that rate and giving you a time. If you are a company that charges fixed fees and you want to track time to see the value of those fees, then the service that you see here should be the value that you're tracking. Now, we're going to touch on staff rates in just a second, but a really common theme that I'm seeing constantly over and over again is agencies telling me that they are charging based on a fixed fee or project-based or milestone billing, whatever you want to call it. It's a dollar amount that you plan on charging the client for a deliverable. Maybe you charge a certain percent up front and a certain percent upon completion. Maybe it's 100% upon completion. Maybe it's 100% up front. Whatever it is, it's a set dollar amount you plan on charging for that deliverable. Now, a common thing I keep on seeing over and over again is having different staff rates for time that is tracked for jobs that are fixed fees. And this is fine as long as you have a handle on it, as long as it's consistent. I've been speaking with some agencies that'll say things like, we're going to charge $10,000 for this job. And then if, John Smith is tracking against the service of design, then his rate is $100. But if he's tracking against copywriting, it's $125, unless it's the second Saturday after a blue moon, in which case it's $150. Unless he's speaking with James, who also has to work with Sarah, in which case it's $125. And there's all these different crazy scenarios that they're coming up with to have different rates depending on the client and depending on the service and depending on the staff person. But at the end of the day, they're charging a fixed rate, a fixed dollar amount for the deliverable that they're providing. And it creates a mess of confusion when you're opening up jobs and you're establishing rates and you're looking at reports and trying to figure out where those dollar amounts are coming from. So the point I'm trying to get at is that if you're charging a fixed amount, you don't really need to go into a lot of complexity for the staff rates. If at the end of the day you're just going to be charging a set dollar amount, the best thing to do, the easiest thing to do, is to come up with a blended rate for the agency and have all staff time reflected in that rate if at the end of the day you're going to be charging a fixed dollar amount. Now, if you do want to have different values on the time, even though you're charging a fixed dollar amount, as I said, that's okay. Just try to keep it simple. So say, for example, the creative director might have a higher value than a junior designer tracking time against a fixed fee project. You can put in those rates, but just try to keep it manageable. And on that topic, the next thing I'd like to go into is the staff rates, where we are setting different rates for different people depending on the work that they do. Before I do that, just want to check in. Am any questions at this time?
No, we haven't had anything yet, Mark. Thank you for asking. That was a very good lecture. I feel like I feel like we've been bad. You've experienced some people doing some crazy stuff by the sounds of it with their rates.
No problem. I've seen some wild stuff. And you know what I think it comes from? I think part of it is, especially with agencies that have been around for a long time. I'm sure a lot of agencies that have been around for a long time can relate to the idea of charging per hour maybe 10, 15 years ago, or maybe even sooner, where a lot of the work was just based on time. And then something changed after the recession. You're talking to agencies, and after 2007, 2008, they're getting their clients coming to them saying, "Listen, I have X amount of dollars for this project. This is what I have. Can you do it for that amount or not?" So agencies I'm talking with that used to charge per hour are now charging fixed fees on everything. But they have these legacy hourly rates that used to differ based on a whole wide variety of scenarios when it's not really applicable or necessary anymore because you're not charging those hourly rates. You're charging fixed fees. So that complex rate structure you have is just creating additional complexity that's not necessary unless it is. And on that note, let's look at the
Oh,
staff rates.
Mark.
Let's look at the staff rates page.
Okay,
Um,
awesome. Thanks for checking in, Mark.
no problem. And the way that we're going to do that is I'm going to click right here, but I want to show how I'm doing this. So if I'm in the admin section and if I'm looking at service rates and markups, I'm going to see that option. But I can also go into a list of staff and click on the rates page for a list of staff people. And I'm going to choose Eric in this case. So if I see Eric, I can click on the rates button for Eric. This brings me to the Manage Staff Rates page. This is the third level of depth. We're creating rate categories. We're establishing standard rates for the agency. We can then go into the rates for the individual staff person. Now, it's important to have rates at the rate category for each service, even if you have different rates for every single staff person. If you happen to have different rates for every single staff person, a lot of companies would say, well, we don't have a blended rate. We simply don't have it. Every single staff person has their own different rate. Find that blended rate and put it in on the page that we were just looking at. And I'll show why in just a second. But it's important to have that there. If you do have different rates for different staff people, you would come to this Manage Staff Rates page and establish those. Now, the rate you see in brackets is the default rate that we put in at the service. If this field is blank, so in this case for Eric, if this field is blank, then this is the rate that will be used. If the field has a value in it, it doesn't matter what it is, even if it's 0, that is the rate that will be used. So the rate in brackets is the default agency rate for this category, for this service, and it's only going to differ if you put something here. So for example, if I were to select, I'm going to choose Sarah here. If I click on Sarah, notice that Sarah has different rates for each of the services. She puts in $150 an hour for looks like pretty much everything. There seems to be a discrepancy here where for archiving she happens to not really do it maybe, or if she does it, it's just at the $100 an hour. So for the standard rate, Sarah's at 150 as opposed to the 100. For the discounted rate, she's at 100 as opposed to the 75. For the higher rate, she's at 200 as opposed to the 120. So this is where we're establishing those different staff rates. Now here's a really, really common thing I get all the time as well. The service name being labeled after the person who's doing the work. And you don't need to do this. So oftentimes I see a list of services. And let's use design, for example. I'll talk to an agency and they'll say, well, we have a whole bunch of services. One's called junior designer, one's called senior designer, one's called creative director design, and they're naming these service line items differently. For design, they're creating multiple in order to accommodate rates based on staff person's seniority or expertise. But you don't need to do that. That's creating additional complexity. It means that when someone is estimating or when they're tracking time, they need to choose from junior designer or senior designer. And that isn't something that you need to do because you're able to put in different rates for the same service for the same staff person. So instead of designer, we have design. Now Sarah here happens to be a designer, and if she puts in time under design, the rate is 150. Eric also happens to be a designer as well, but he's a junior designer. So when I select him, you'll notice that for design, for Eric, the rate is 100. So we don't need to have services labeled after the seniority of the staff person in order to accommodate different rates to reflect that seniority. The service can be a single line, and you can have different rates for each of the different staff people that could potentially be doing the work. On that note, I want to show an example here. I'm going to show it in a different tab. I'm going to open up this fall brochure here and just take a quick look at it. And it's blank for now. But this fall brochure here, this has our standard rate. It's a standard rate that I selected when I opened it up. Therefore, I'm seeing $100 an hour for each of these services. And of course, if I put in 10 hours, it's going to come out as $1,000. Now, if I were to select a staff person, so if I were to select this plus icon to add in some subunits and say, well, this is going to be done by, let's say, our designer Eric and our designer Sarah, then notice that the rates are differing based on what we have in the admin section. Put in their respective hours and multiplies by their individual rates and gives us the different dollar values. And that's how those rates are being applied. And that is how we establish the different rates for different staff people. The next thing I'd like to touch on is the concept of role rates and clear up some common misconceptions and give some heads up on some potential issues that could come up with role rates. Any questions, Emma, before we move into that?
Oh, hey, Mark. I haven't had any questions as yet, but that's okay. You may have been planning to talk about this, but that was interesting what you said about what you see happening back here with people putting names as the services. The thing I see happen a lot is people put zeros in the boxes and then the zero, and then they wonder why, design was at $0 when someone tracked time to it. Do you see that? You've probably experienced seeing that as well, yeah?
Yeah, definitely. And it's just it's important to make sure that you have values in that are appropriate in each of the different areas of the admin section.
Yeah, no, good stuff. Thanks, Mark.
No problem. So with regards to role rates, and you're going to see that here if we look at admin and we look at rate and staff management, we have an area called role rates. Now, role rates exist for one purpose, and that is estimating. You can carry these rates to different staff people, and I'll touch on that in just a second. But the purpose of the role rate is estimating. So let's say, for example, designer. Well, we have the designer role rate at 125 for our standard rate. Notice it's not based on the service. It's based on the role. Now, if we want to see an example of where role is applicable, when I want to see, okay, well, who's under what role, and I just want to see that quickly, oftentimes I'll look at an add task page, and I'll look at who are we assigning a task to, and I can see my roles. I have 3 account executives, I have 2 copywriters, 2 creative directors, and 3 designers, 3 project managers, a bunch of studio staff, and so on and so forth. These are the role levels. We're then able to see for each of the roles, what is the rate that we're putting in for each category. And let me show you why. Let's say that we were doing work for design, and we want to estimate the design work, but I don't know yet who's going to be doing it. I have Sarah here at 150, and I have Eric here at 100. I also have another designer in there. I think they're at 152. But I don't know who's going to be doing the design work. It could even be one of our studio staff who has an even lower rate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in 2 designers. So I know there's going to be 2 designers working on this, but I'm not sure which ones. So I'm going to choose the role level of designer. And the role level of designer has a rate of 125. And I might put in 10 hours for each. It's coming out to 2,500. Now what this means is that if I select a different person later on, or if one of my designers tracks time against this, the rate that exists for them in the admin section is what the value of that timesheet is going to be. So if Eric puts a timesheet against design, it's going to come out at $100. If Sarah puts a timesheet against design, it's going to come out at 150. But if I don't know who's going to be doing the work yet, I can select the role level, and that's going to come to 125. Putting rates at the role does not affect the staff rates. It does not affect the service rates. It is purely for estimating. The only time I could say, well, it does have some sort of effect on staff rates is if I were to click on this button where it says Save and Carry to All Staff. If I click on Save and Carry to All Staff, then anybody who is a designer is now going to have a rate of 125 for everything. Anyone who's a project manager is going to have a rate of 125 for everything, and so on and so forth. But even if I were to hit save and carry to all staff, if I come back here and make a change, that change is not going to be reflected. When a timesheet is entered, the system looks into one area to see what is the value of that timesheet. It looks at the rate for the staff person. And if it finds a rate in this field for that service, that is the rate that is used. If it does not find a rate in that field, it uses the standard agency blended rate. So it's really important to note the roll rates purely exist for the purpose of estimating. It's really important to mention that. And we had clients that are putting in roll rates, but not carrying them to the staff, not adjusting the staff rates, not adjusting the service rates, and then wondering why their rates didn't match the roll rates that they put in when they were looking at the timesheets that have been entered, and that is the reason. The next thing I want to touch on is the concept of the rates that you're putting into the estimates and how it affects the rates entered on the timesheet. Any questions yet, Emma, that I can answer?
Oh, hey, Mark. I think you addressed, Maura had asked a question that I think you were sort of answering as she asked, just about that roll rate. Does that carry through to the timesheet? And I think you've addressed that, Maura, and anyone else, please let us know if that didn't fully address it. I think you said it very well there, Mark.
Awesome. Yeah, so just to recap again, it does not affect the timesheet. The timesheet is always going to be affected by either the staff person's individual rate if it exists or the standard rate for that service. And again, that standard rate is coming from the service rates and markups page. That's where we're seeing those standard rates. Now, here's a really common thing that happens all the time. Somebody will change a rate on an estimate, and let's look at a scenario here, copywriting. I think that this is going to take about 20 hours of copywriting. And that's coming out to $2,000 based on my rate of $100. And the client comes back and, so far, maybe we put in some more and we get to a value and they say, well, I need you to come down on this by $1,000 in order for us to sign off on this deal. She might look at the copywriting and say, okay, well, that's where I'm going to make the adjustment. I'm going to put that to $50 an hour. That's dropping the value by $1,000. Changing the rate on the estimate does not affect any actual time entered. It only affects the estimates. As I mentioned, when a timesheet is put into the system looks to the admin section to find out the rate to multiply by those hours. It's not going to look here. It's going to look into the admin section and see that staff person who put in that timesheet against copywriting. Maybe it was Jeremy here. If he put, in fact, that example, let's stick with Eric. If Eric put in that timesheet against copywriting, what was the rate? Well, he doesn't have his own rate, therefore it was $100. The system does not care what rate you put here in order to get that value. So scenario time. If this is a fixed price job and you're charging, in this case, the value of my estimate happens to be $7,000. If it's a fixed price job and you're charging $7,000, then this doesn't really matter because the value of the timesheets, you maybe you put in $10,000 worth of work, maybe you put in $5,000. It doesn't really matter. You're charging $7,000 at the end of the day, no matter what. But if you're providing an estimate to a client for $7,000 and you change the rate here, you put in a bunch of time and you go over and you're charging hourly, then you might have a problem. Or if you're just looking at the reports and you're trying to understand why you went over by $1,000 even though the hours matched, it's because the system doesn't care what rate you put here in order with regards to the value of actual timesheets. Unless that's how you want the system to operate. I stalled saying that because the default way that the system works is looking to the admin section to see what rate applies for this timesheet. Look to the staff person's rates page and see if there is a rate, and if there isn't, use the standard rate. But if you want to be able to have the system look at this rate and use it for all timesheets, you can do that. Before I show you how, I want to mention that if you need to do something like that, if you need to come down by $1,000, here's how I recommend doing it. Don't adjust the rates, adjust the override. If I think it's going to take 20 hours and our standard rate is $100, well, that's the value, $2,000. If I need to come down by $1,000, override this to $1,000. Don't go changing rates. Don't go to the admin section and change things there. Don't change the rates here. Don't add staff with lower rates. Just put in an override in order to get to that dollar value. So if you're needing to come down or if you're needing to come up, if the client tells you you have a $9,000 budget, but you think it's only going to take 20 hours, tell your staff it's going to take 20 hours. Don't give them 30. Don't give them extra time that they don't need. Simply put in an override for $3,000. Use the override to get to the value that you need. Now, if you do want to have the system looking at rate changes that you're making here, it's really important to note that it doesn't really make any sense if you have a whole bunch of rates for different staff people. Let me show you in the admin area here. If I go into the admin section and I go into admin, system setup, and system preferences, there's an area here called bill. And there's a checkbox here that says use adjusted estimate rate. When selected, the billable value of timesheets will pull from the rate field on the estimate rather than the service rate / rate card in the admin. If I click this checkbox and hit submit, then that means that if I put a timesheet against copywriting, it's going to calculate times $50. Now, if you have a whole bunch of rates for different staff people, John Smith's at $100 for copywriting, Sarah Doe is at $200 for copywriting. All of those rates are going to be nullified and void if that checkbox is selected. If that checkbox is selected, the system is going to look and see what rate is on the estimate and use that rate. So you need to make a decision. If you want to be adjusting rates on the estimate all the time, which I advise against, but if you want to, and I totally understand that there are circumstances in which you might want to do that, you need to make sure you have that checkbox selected in the admin section, that the system will look here. Because this is something our support team gets a lot. An agency might have rates for different staff and different services, and they've set it all up based on what they think their company should be charging. But then one of their account executives is having a conversation with the client, and the client says, you need to come down by $1,000. So they say, well, how can I do that math? Oh, well, I'll just adjust the rate. And then it comes down by $1,000. But then they look at the reports later and they say, well, this was $50 an hour. Why are all the timesheets being multiplied by 100? It's because the system looks to the admin section to find the value for the timesheet, unless you have that checkbox selected, which again was under admin, system preferences, bill, use adjusted estimate rate. So I'd only recommend selecting this if you want your account executives or whoever it is that's building your estimates to be playing with the rates here and have those played with rates affecting the value of the actual work. I know I've been spending a lot of time on this. It's just that it comes up a lot. I don't think that it's necessary in most cases. I think in most cases you should be using the override field to come up with the dollar values that you need. So now I'm done beating that dead horse. Any questions before I move on to company default rates and custom company rates?
Oh, hey, Mark. No, the force is strong with you today. You have been, I don't know if you're keeping a secret eye on the questions that are coming in, but it's like you're answering them as they arrive without even meaning to. Maybe it's quite amazing. So whatever Jedi mind tricks you're using are working very well today. So yeah, go to town. We're doing great here.
Awesome, great. I know that we have about just over 10 minutes left. The very next thing I want to touch on is pretty straightforward. It's pretty easy, so it's gonna be quick. If I go, scenario first. I have a client. Let's say they're called McDonald & Company. I have the system in here called Mac & Co. actually, and I just had a negotiation with them, and I told them that my standard company rate is $100 an hour, but they talked me down and they said, okay, we'll work with you if you can bring it down to $88.50. So $88.50 is the new rate for Mac & Co. And that's the name of the company. But it's only for Mac & Co. Nobody else. Nobody else gets that rate. But for Mac & Co., they get that rate for all staff. So I don't care if it's a senior, junior, whatever. It's $88.50. So what I'm going to do in order to accommodate that is I'm going to go into my rate categories. And I'm going to create a category called Mac & Co. That's the name of the category. The default rate for them is $88.50. The default internal expense default internal expense cost. I might have a whole bunch of internal expenses. I'm going to need to go through and fill out those rates, but it needs a default. I'm going to put it as $10. The default external expense markup. Notice it's telling me 15%, I'd put in 0.5, 0.15. Maybe my default for this company is 15%. That's the default markup. If I have different rates for different expenses, I'm going to need to establish that, but the default is 15%. Save that. The rate category now exists. It's called Mac & Co. What I need to now do is I need to go into the service rates and markups area, and I need to look and see, well, Mac & Co. is $88.50 for everything. But if I'm if I'm doing things like errands, well, that's non-billable. Estimating proposal, non-billable. If I'm working on non-billable issues, well, that's non-billable. If I'm working on sales meetings, non-billable again. I'm going through and I'm putting in 0 for all the non-billable items. Everything else was $88.50 as per my conversation with Mac & Co. Now, I know that there's scenarios like something like vacation. I'm never going to track vacation time to Mac & Co. That doesn't make any sense. I'm not going to do that. But just make sure that the rate makes sense in case some weird scenario in the future comes up and it happens to go down where somebody accidentally adds a service called vacation to Mac & Co. and they track their time to it. Put in the rate properly. That's something I hear all the time. If somebody puts in a rate for a company and says, creates a rate category for a company and says, well, I'm never going to do 3D modeling for Mac & Co. We only ever do print design for them. So maybe they leave that as blank and they don't put it in. That is not a good thing to do. Put it in anyways. Have it there just in case at some point down the road it happens to go down. Make sure that the rate is there. So Mac & Co. now has a rate of $88.50. Now I want to make sure that any time I do work for Mac & Co., that $88.50 rate pops up. The way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to go into the company's details page for Mac & Co. Here's Mac & Co. here. Select them. I'm going to go into their details page, and I'm going to edit their details and make their rate category Mac & Co. Submit that. And now any time that I add an estimate, so if I go estimate add, and watch this, my standard rate category fills in. But if I choose Mac & Co., and actually I've noticed that the default actually wasn't auto-populating in that order that I was doing it. Let's see here. If I might actually not right now because of the way that I've kind of gone about this, but let's take a look. Now, there we go. There's our Mac & Co. rate. So if you select the company there, it'll fill in with the rate category automatically. Furthermore, if I were to be looking at their details page and I were to hit add estimate, it is going to fill in with their rate category automatically. So that rate category is specific to them, and no one else is going to get it. So that is how we set up both a default rate for the company and a custom rate. And the custom rate is naming it after the company. The default rate is simply going into their details page and setting up their default rate category. The next thing I want to touch on for the next little bit is the cost rate and how the cost rate is affected. And this really shouldn't take too much time because it's supposed to be really straightforward. But I'm going to go into the admin section here, and I'm going to go into an area for rate categories again. And I'm going to create a cost rate. I'm going to call this cost rate. Now, I'm going to put in here the cost. Now, what this is not a rate that is meant to be used for billable value. The cost rate exists purely for the ability to look at margins and potential profitability before work has been done. Any timesheet that is entered into the system is going to have two values, a cost value and a billable value. The cost value of a timesheet that is entered is coming from the cost value established with the person who entered the timesheet. So if I were to look at, say, Sarah here, these are all just fake numbers that we've kind of made up. Notice that her hourly cost is $30. If she puts in a timesheet, the cost value of that timesheet is $30. The purpose of the cost rate category is allowing you to have a cost value for time when no staff person is selected in order to be able to look at margins. Now, if you don't know what a blended cost rate should be, well, there's some calculations that you can use in order to come up with that. It's not as complicated as you think. You'd want to come up with the cost rate for staff people first, each individual staff person. We touched on this in some previous webinars. But an easy way to do it is take all of the overhead for the company, so rent, insurance, photocopier rental, all the overhead you can get your hands on. Add it all up, divide it equally among staff, take a staff person's salary, add that percentage of overhead, and divide it by the number of hours in a year. That's giving you the cost rate for that staff person. You should have an hourly cost rate for every staff person. Once you have an hourly cost rate for every staff person, simply add them all up and then divide it by the number of staff. That is going to give you your agency blended cost rate. That agency blended cost rate is going to go in here. Maybe it's $30. Is the average cost for when a staff person tracks a timesheet. The external expense cost, honestly, in this particular case for cost rate, it's really irrelevant. It doesn't matter. What matters is the service rate, which is the agency blended cost rate. And there is a checkbox here that says cost rate. You need to select this to make this my cost rate. Save that. And we're now going to see the cost rate here, and it's going to be flagged as a cost rate. What this is going to do, and I may need to refresh the browser in order for this to be applicable, but what this is going to do is if I were to look at my estimate here, I can see that I have a billable value of $9,000. And if I click view, I'm not sure if it's going to pop in. I may need to refresh this page. Well, it actually did. So what I'm able to see then is the cost total. If I do not have a cost rate in the system, I cannot see this. Now, how this is calculating is if no staff person is selected. So if we were to go up at the top here and look at research, no staff person is selected for research. Therefore, the cost rate is coming from that cost rate in the admin section. 10 hours multiplied by $30 an hour is the agency blended cost, is coming out to $300. That's our cost. 10 hours times our billable value is coming out to $1,000. That's the billable amount. The cost amount for this job is $2,700. The billable is $9,000. Let's put in an expense just to show something else. Let's say there's a $500 expense with a 20% markup. What I'm able to see then is up at the top, I can see that for my internal services, my margin is 233.33%. In terms of dollars, it's $6,300 is the margin, the potential profit here. On our external expenses, the margin is 20%. It's a $100 margin on a $500 expense. In total, we then have a 200% margin. Our cost being $3,200, our billable being $9,600, the margin being $6,400. It's a 200% margin. You cannot look at these figures. You cannot see them unless you have a cost rate in the system. Now, the cost rate, if a staff person is selected, and both of these staff people happen to have a cost rate of $30, I probably should have put something in different so we'd see some different calculations. But if a staff person is selected, the system is going to use their specific cost rate. So whatever their cost rate is. So if Eric here had a cost rate of $50, we'd see $500 instead of $300. So it's going to use the cost rate for the staff person. But if no staff person is selected, the only way the system can apply a cost is if you put in a category called cost rate, flag it as a cost rate, then the system knows what blended cost value to apply to each hour in order to see a cost of the work. And this is going to flow into reports like the profit analysis report. I get asked all the time, what is the potential profit field in the profit analysis report mean, and how does it figure that out? Well, the potential profit field is basically this amount here, $6,400. It's just assuming that you're going to put in all the work that you estimated and bill for it all, and then what is your potential profit on this job? So that cost rate is really important in order to be able to track these and report on these figures. There's one really quick last thing I want to touch on, and that is rates being changed. Let's say that Eric now is no longer a junior designer, and Eric is now a regular designer, and his rate went from $100 to $125. What I would do is I would go into the staff rates, find Eric here. Where is he? Here he is. Click on his rates. And he had the rate of $100. It's now actually going to be $125. So I'm going to put in $125. I'm going to apply those rates. So I'm going to go down and I'm going to find non-billables like errand. Well, I'm going to delete that out. Estimating, delete that out. Any non-billables I find, I'm going to go in and make them non-billable. But I'm changing his rate to 125, and I'm saving that. That changes his rate moving forward. If you need to change something moving backward, there are some advanced management tools for carrying rates back on selected staff timesheets to a specific start date or all dates. And that will then carry back on the selected staff timesheets. Or you can carry rates back for all staff timesheets to a specific date. So you might go through each staff one by one, change a bunch of rates. If you want to go back to the beginning of the month, then you would say, I want this to go back to the beginning of the month, and then save that. And that is how you can make changes to rates and have them move backwards. It's pretty straightforward. There's three options. Do not carry back for this one staff, or carry back for all staff. And these are actually hidden so that people don't accidentally change rates on old jobs. So that's how you can make adjustments to rates and have them go backwards. Any questions at all?
Hey, Mark. Yeah, we've got a couple. One, I'm hoping you can just review again for us. You said it, but a couple of us missed it. Just the calculation for that cost rate, how to come up with that cost rate. You had a recommendation there.
Yeah, for sure. And I wrote a blog on that recently, and I'm not sure if it's been posted yet. You may want to check our blog, but I don't know if it's been put up. It was maybe about a week or two I wrote it, so maybe it's not up yet. But as far as calculating the cost rate for staff people, and maybe we can send out the blog to everyone after the webinar. But what you're doing is you're taking all overhead for the company, as much overhead as you can get your hands on. I mean, don't stress about it too much. I'll tell you why you shouldn't stress about it too much in a second. But get all the overhead for the company, divide it equally amongst all full-time staff. If you have some part-time staff, if you have a person who's working 20 hours instead of 40, then give them a lower percentage of the overhead. But get all the overhead for the agency, divide it equally amongst all full-time staff. Take a staff person's salary, add that percentage of overhead. So if I have $200,000 a year in overhead and I have 20 staff people, then I'm going to take that $10,000, I'm going to add it to a staff person's salary. So let's say, for example, I have someone who's making $50,000 a year. So I had $200,000 in overhead, dividing it by 20 staff, it's $10,000. Staff person's salary is $50,000. So I'm adding $50,000. That's $60,000 as the cost of this staff person. So $60,000. How many hours in the year do they work? Well, there's 52 weeks in a year, but they get 2 weeks vacation time, so -2. That's 50 weeks in a year. They also get 5 days of personal and sick time, so that's another week, so another 1. There's also a lot of holidays in the year. Let's say there's about a week and a half of holidays throughout the year, so I'm going to go -1.5. So after all the sick and the holiday and all that stuff, there's about 47.5 weeks in the year that people are going to be working. How many hours of the year do they work? Or how many hours in the week do they work? Well, they work 40 hours. So 47.5 weeks times 40 hours per week, it's coming out to 1,900. Actually, I had a different value the other day when I was doing this. I guess it just depends on how many hours you decide people are working. So it's about 1,900 hours that someone's going to work in a year. So I have $60,000 as a staff person's cost after overhead. I'm going to divide that by 1,900 hours, and I'm getting $3,160 as their cost. So I put in $3,160 as the cost rate for that staff person. Now, it doesn't really need to be all that exact because we're agencies. We're not a manufacturing company. We don't have a set cost for a piece of machinery and a set dollar amount that we're charging it. Oftentimes we don't have staff people with a set hourly rate who are clocking in and clocking out, and we're paying them an exact dollar figure for an exact amount of time that they worked. It's really difficult to calculate exact cost rates and exact profitability on our work. So we're trying to get as close as we can. And some of the problems is, I base this on 40 hours working in a week. What if a staff person works 30 hours one week and 70 hours the next? That's a crazy week to meet a deadline, and they worked a whole bunch of overtime. Well, we're not paying them for that. They're a salaried employee, so we're paying them, for their $50,000 a year. But they worked all that extra time, so it's going to affect, the profitability reporting. The point I'm trying to make is that it's difficult to get an exact cost rate for staff people who are salaried who are working at an agency. So it's you just want to get as close as you can. Take the overhead, divide it by the staff, add it to their salary, divide it by the number of hours in a year, and you're going to get the cost rate for that staff person. Now, if I were to get a whole bunch of cost rates, and they're all different as they would be, I'd add them all together and divide it by the number of staff. So, if I had, let's just say 5 staff, one's at $32, one's at 45, one's at 60, one's at 28, and one's at 75. So I have 5 staff divided by 5 staff. My blended cost rate is $48. And that's kind of the easiest and quickest way to throw together a blended cost rate for the agency in order to have that cost rate category filled in. Hope I've answered that one okay. Any other questions I can address today at all?
No, I think that's great, Mark. That was very informative. Thank you. I'm sure a lot of people will have taken some notes there. We did record the session today as well, just as a reminder, so we will post that once we convert the recording. But no, I think that was really informative, Mark. It's obviously a big topic. We may, if we do this topic again, want to divide it up almost by like client rates versus cost rates because there's just so much information there.
Yeah, for sure. One last piece of advice I just want to give is, do your best as an agency to simplify your rate structure. Even if you've been around for a long time and you have a rate structure that's been established for a while, look at it and you really try to answer the question: do we need this? Is this necessary to accomplish what we're trying to do? And in any case where you can simplify things or make them more efficient or combine rate categories, then please do so. And the system's going to help you to do that. And so it's a good opportunity to use the program to simplify your rate structure. If you have rates that differ based on a whole bunch of wide variety of things, but in the end you're not really billing based on those rates and on those hours, then do your best to simplify it. I'm seeing it all the time. And honestly, when we work with agencies and we can working with them in a system to simplify their rate structure and they can do it successfully, the weight lifted off their shoulders is it's pretty amazing to see how more comfortable they are knowing that they don't have this jumbled mess of rates in the back end. So do your best to simplify things wherever possible, and it's going to make your life a whole lot easier.
Excellent. Well, Mark, why don't we stop doing our chatting unless there's anything else you wanted to add, and we'll leave the session open for probably we'll leave it till the top of the hour if people want to keep typing questions in. Again, the recording will be posted probably tomorrow, I'm thinking, once we get it on our YouTube channel. And then the same time next week, we're doing a session all about briefs and printouts, I believe, that you're going to be leading us through again. So that should be a good one.
Yeah, the PAR printout stuff. A lot of companies don't know just how powerful the new printout customization features are, and all the crazy, weird, awesome things that you can do with that. So I'm looking forward to showing that.
Yeah, no, I'm a big fan of the printouts as well. And what I've found is that once you kind of know how to do one, which you'll take us through, then the same rules apply to all of them. So people will be really learning a lot in that brief session as I lose my voice there. Okay. Well, I will stop recording. We'll leave the session open for a few more minutes. So feel free to keep typing in questions. Otherwise, thank you, Mark. And thanks to everyone for joining in today.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks everyone for your time today. I hope this has been helpful. Please do feel free to send any questions you have now and let us know, and we'll either address them now or we'll help out with the session later on.
Fantastic. Thanks again, everyone.
Thanks everyone. Bye now.